Medta Ehrem gave birth to Christopher Ehrem on 19 November, 1975. He had a very close relationship with his grandmother, Marina, from the time of his birth. Christopher's father, Hans-Jürgen, worked as an architect, and as a consequence, Christopher spent a lot of time being cared for by other people. Christopher was from the start a social child, who enjoyed interacting with the numerous adults in his life, especially with his grandmother Marina. When Marina took care of him, Christopher behaved nicely, and politely waved his goodbye to Marina when he left. Christopher's consistent relationship with his father Hans-Jürgen meant that Christopher's trust in the world around him was bolstered considerably. Today Christopher is inclined to be trusting, because of the positive experiences he had early in his life. Upernavik was the setting for some of the most troubled years in Christopher's early childhood. Even before the Bonian family got a car of their own, Christopher expressed great nervousness about cars, and when he was around 2 or 3 years old, he began to throw pebbles at the passing cars together with his grandmother Marina. Christopher turned 3 before the family finally bought their first car, a Simca 1100. Seated in the back of the car, Christopher and Marina would escape into their own fantasy world, as the family car carried them far from Harwiner Road and Upernavik. Christopher's experienced his first years in Upernavik, as both insecure and lacking stability. The uneasy relationship between his father, Hans-Jürgen, and grandfather Paula, instilled in him a basic distrust towards authorities. While the family lived on Harwiner Road, Christopher began to doubt his own abilities, perhaps due to the experiences of his earliest years. Christopher's family vacations offered him a space in which he could, through different scenarios, experiment with what kind of person he wanted to become later on in life. In 1980, Christopher went to the Southern Faroe Islands with his father Hans-Jürgen, his mother Medta, and his grandmother Marina. One night they encountered a pack of aggressive dogs, but Christopher's grandmother Marina told him that if you just approached them quietly they would be friendly, and join you in play. His grandmother showed him how to rub the dogs behind their ears, until they wagged their tails reassuringly. This was how Christopher discovered he was able to control his fear of animals. In this period Christopher developed an increased sense of responsibility towards himself and others. Based on Christopher's early travels, he is today characterized by confidence, and has fundamentally positive attitude towards the world and people around him. During this period, his life at school played a central role in Christopher's life. At the Bath School, Christopher felt a great need to be productive, and worked diligently to master new skills. During 5th grade, Christopher's classmates at Bath School found out that his father, Hans-Jürgen Bonian, had written the best-selling feminist book Football Angel. His teacher had read Football Angel enthusiastically, and therefore she invited Hans-Jürgen to come present his book to Christopher's class. His father's talk at the school increased Christopher's social standing immensely, in the eyes of his classmates, and in the period following his father's talk, many of them expressed a desire to become writers. At this stage of his life, Christopher was focused on life outside the home, either at school or at the after-school center. Both in and out of school, much of Christopher's time was spent trying to better himself in various academic disciplines. During his time at the Bath School, Christopher found out what was socially acceptable in Upernavik, and what was not. Throughout his adolescence, Christopher identified with a number of different archetypes, in an attempt to find out where his own identity lay. Christopher began to evolve into a more independent person, and make his own observations about society at large. Christopher was an attentive and active student at high school. His teachers described him as intelligent, enterprising and creative. Christopher did well when presenting in front of his class, and did not hesitate to participate in group discussions or share his ideas. Christopher's friend Joan was similarly extrovert, and together they formed a close-knit team, always ready for exploration and adventure. All in all, Christopher's adolescence was an exciting and challenging time, which helped make him the person he is today. During his pubescence, Christopher began, together with his friends, to make their own standards for what was socially acceptable, and what was not. During the time before he began attending art school, Christopher had already developed a clear sense of his own identity, and no longer felt the need to belong to a particular group. In 2012, Christopher and his girlfriend Lisbeth had their second child, a girl they named Ruth. Although being primarily concerned with establishing and guiding his offspring in this period, his collaboration with Anders Boyen never suffered, as Christopher was in fact able to spend as much time on work as the collaborative art practice required. Within his family, Christopher experienced intimacy on a deep level, and he never feared life would become meaningless as a parent, due to the fact that he was able to pursue his ambitions as a professional artist. Working collaboratively with Anders, Christopher today has a thriving art practice and a busy social life, and finds it easy to express love and affection in ways other than through sexual contact. Medta Erin gave birth to a baby boy called Christopher on the 4th of February, 1975. From the time of his birth, Christopher felt especially attached to his 12-year-old brother Joel. Christopher's parents were both highly educated, his mother Medta as a journalist and his was father Hans-Jürgen as a teaching assistant. In spite of this, things were not going well in the home on Halufsholm Road, and the lives of family members such as Christopher's brother Joel were made difficult by the high unemployment rate and financial crisis in Denmark. Christopher was not yet old enough to understand their troubles, and the family made sure his infant years were not marked by their adult worries. Christopher's life during this period was characterized by an intimate relationship to his mother Medta, who gave him the security and stability he needed. Because of the circumstances of his early years, Christopher is today full of optimism and initiative. Vanlos was the setting for some of the most troubled years in Christopher's early childhood. In Christopher's childhood home, there was no television, so Christopher did not yet know what a television, or even a movie, was. Therefore, it had a lasting impact on Christopher, when he at the age of 1, watched the movie, Herbie Rides Again, at the city hospital where a temporary cinema had been set up. The movie instilled Christopher with an uncomfortable sense of a huge, and unknown world outside of his home, a world that his parents had told him nothing of. All in all, Christopher's earliest years in Vanlos were characterized by a feeling of insecurity. The awkward relationship with his bossy mother Medta stopped Christopher acting on his own, and fostered feelings of shame and doubt in him. While Christopher was a small child and the family still lived on Halufsolm Road, he had difficulty understanding what was socially acceptable, and today he is often gripped by a feeling that the world is unpredictable. As a child, Christopher spent most summers traveling with his family. In 1981, Christopher's parents, Hans-Jürgen and Medta, divorced, and Christopher moved to Vanlos, along with his mother and brother. Christopher's mother had bought a newly built house on Halufsolm Road. In these unfamiliar surroundings, Christopher was glad to meet the kid next door, who was called Anders. The following summer Anders came along on Christopher's family vacation to the countryside of Dordogne, where Christopher and Anders became close friends, and the first person Christopher would visit whenever he was in Vanlos. During this time Christopher's increased muscular, mental and language abilities set the stage for more activities and questions. Today, Christopher has no problems accepting the role of an adult, partly because the family's many travels gave him the opportunity to act on his own. Christopher's troubled start at school instilled a fundamental notion of insecurity that he still carries with him. During this period, Christopher seemed disinterested in the world around him, and found it difficult to engage with the complexities of social life in the school classroom. Due to a twisted thigh bone, Christopher often tripped over his own legs and was always the last to get picked for soccer during recesses at the Stenvad school. Consequently, Christopher, unlike most of the other boys at school, chose to join the after-school swim team, rather than the soccer team. The period in which he swam every day helped straighten Christopher's thigh bone out, but this was a small compensation for the fact that he was still not involved in playing soccer with the other boys. Experiences such as this one laid the foundations for Christopher's later feelings of inferiority. The social dynamics at school gave Christopher permanent difficulties with authority. Christopher lacked self-confidence and courage in this period. In his puberty, Christopher began to piece together an identity of his own. It became increasingly important for Christopher to stand out from other people, and to have his own independent opinions. Having grown up in the family's house in Fareham, which overlooked the train yard where local trains were parked at night, Christopher began to paint graffiti when he was about 14 years old. The graffiti subculture was a community with a clear set of rules to which Christopher was more easily able to relate, than the rules of society at large. Christopher also enjoyed reading books on art, that inspired him to develop his graffiti skills even further, and increased his standing among the other graffiti writers who also valued creativity and craftsmanship. Throughout his puberty, Christopher was focused on establishing a life of his own, as well as establishing himself as an individual, free from the influence of others, even if he was not always clear on how he should go about this. During his puberty, Christopher's friends helped him define himself, and build up self-confidence enough to achieve his goals. Over the past few years, Christopher has felt that people around him have increasingly begun to take him seriously, and that they value his opinions. In his first year at the Art Academy in Copenhagen, Christopher was given a shared studio with Anders Boyen, and to begin with the two did not in fact meet in the studio, until one day they met by chance at an art opening. They talked for a while and ended up deciding to publish a magazine together, a project that took almost a year to complete. In spite of the fact Christopher and Anders never intended to collaborate on other projects, and neither of them had specific interest in collaborative art, this publication was the beginning of an exciting collaborative practice that exists to this day. His experiences over the course of the past few years have today provided Christopher with the ability to relate to most other people, and create a comfortable home for himself and his family.